Hi there, it's Catrin from 3Ps. Thanks for joining me. This video is about what Brexit can teach us about weight training. I'm a Brit, obviously, from my accent, and we just had this big vote, as you probably know, which is going to take us out of Europe, otherwise known as Brexit. I've been thinking about what we learn from that, which we can apply to weight training. I'm a personal trainer, a weight specialist, and a coach, so I'm always looking at examples from life and seeing how they can help my clients to train better. So here goes. These are my principles from Brexit applied to weight training. So after written these down, I'm going to get serious here. First of all, okay, the first point is persistence. When this all started, no one ever thought that we would vote out. This has been an exercise in persistence by the campaign that wanted us out. The leader of that campaign, a guy called Nigel Farage, if you don't know him, he's been frequently laughed at, sneered at, but he's ended up on the winning side. It reminds me of a quote from Gandhi, who always said that in relation to any sort of fight for something to change, it goes through a process, and the process goes, first they ignore you, then they make fun of you, then they fight you, then you win. Now, Brexit and Nigel Farage is a classic example of that. They ignored him, then they made fun of him, then they fought him, then he won. Now, obviously he didn't do it on his own, but the point I'm making here is that in terms of your own persistence, ignore what other people think, decide what you want and go after it, and don't listen to the naysayers, people who say you can't achieve it. If you want to build muscle, you'll build muscle. If you want to be a bodybuilder, you'll be a bodybuilder. If you're looking to drop a lot of weight, you will be able to drop a lot of weight. It's all about persistence. Okay, so that's the first point, is persistence. The second point I wanted to make is about understanding emotional motivation. So understanding your own emotional motivation. In a Brexit context, the bit that the politicians missed completely was the number of people that in the UK were just basically annoyed with globalisation, annoyed with change, and wanted to have their voices heard, and they had been ignored consistently over a number of years, and this was their chance. It was a single issue vote: should we stay in Europe, should we stay out, should we go out? And they took their chance to vote, and particularly older voters in this country voted out. And these are people who are traditionally ignored by the pollsters and the politicians, and they had their day in the sun. Now, applying that to a weights context, you need to understand, if you are trying to institute a change or reach a goal, understanding your emotional motivation is absolutely key. So if your emotional motivation is, for example, significance, significance is, feeling that you matter. If you're a man, for example, building muscle often is about deliberately occupying more space in the world because you want to be more significant. If it's about winning a particular contest, be it a fitness, physique, or a bodybuilding contest, it's about having that medal to show that your training matters. If you are motivated by significance, understand that motivation and set yourself goals which will help you achieve that. So do things like enter competitions. Do things like make sure that you've got goals that you've publicised so other people are watching and giving you feedback and they're cheering you on. So that if your driver is significant, make your fitness goals significant. If your driver is actually not significant, it is, for example, connection or acceptance, those are more group context things, then maybe your fitness goals will be better suited to either training with a buddy or training in a group. If we put that into a Brexit context, a lot of the motivation, emotional motivation behind the vote out was people feeling that they had lost connection in their own communities. They felt that the communities had changed so quickly that they didn't have any connection anymore. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be rational. That was how they emotionally felt, and that's what they said was their driver for voting. Now, interestingly, when you look at the distribution of votes, in fact, the communities where the heaviest votes were places like Yorkshire, which probably had the least amount of recent immigration, and in fact London, which is an absolute melting pot of immigration, that we voted to stay in. So that's the point I'm making here, is that these sorts of emotional motivations are not necessarily rational, but they are heartfelt. And in terms of your own weight training, go with your emotional motivation and feed that emotional motivation. So if your emotional motivation is connection, then look to connect through your training, either by having a training buddy, training in a group, or even, for example, forming a relationship with a personal trainer. That might help you to achieve your goals. Okay, the next point is, the tendency to romanticize the past. A lot of sniggering has been going on in Europe because of the unrealistic nature of some of the motivations of people voting who say, you know, they want to go back. You can't go back. You can only go forward, but they want to go back. And they romanticise what the past was like. My husband is an immigrant, and he said something to me about the vote. He said to me that when we refer to immigrants, if you go back 150 years, that word wasn't immigrant, that word was slave. And I think there's a real grain of truth in that. And so when we try and romanticise the past, what we're actually talking about is a past in this country where we still had an underclass, we still had people who were willing to work for less money than we were willing to work, but we controlled them. They didn't get free rights in the way that within Europe we have free movement. So that's in a Brexit context. In a training context, that means don't over-romanticise how things were in the past. One of the things I've done a video on in the past on this channel is about the circularity of training, so that when you train, you can't stay at your peak all the time. So you basically, you'll cycle your fitness, and you need to accept that, because if you're always trying to aim for your peak, you'll get injured, you'll get burnt out. You need to accept the fact that you'll have periods where you're really, really in shape and periods when you're less in shape, and that's about how your life goes. Because also, in order to be in peak shape, you have to prioritise it as number one. There will be times in your life when you're not able to prioritise it as number one because there are other things important to you. There's a fantastic book by a guy called Seth Godin called The One. If you haven't read it, I'll put the link in the notes. And that's all about this idea that if you want to succeed in anything, you have to focus. But in order to focus, you're going to have to let other parts of your life go out of balance. Now that applies equally to fitness to anything else. Seth Godin is a business writer, but it applies to fitness. So if you want to be in great shape, then you need to really focus on it, and other parts of your life may slip. Now that's not something which you can maintain long term, because you can't have a life completely out of balance, particularly, for example, in relation to your relationships. You need to give time to those. So the point I come back to is, if you, for example, had a period in the past where you were super fit, don't romanticize that. Understand it's a process, but also understand you can get back to fitness, and you will get back to fitness. And if you have a lifetime commitment to, you know, physical activity, you'll get used to the idea that it's like the tides. You'll have periods of high tide and periods of low tide, and that's okay. And you'll also find that your taste in terms of fitness will change. So maybe your goal at the moment is to get big with muscle. Your goal in 10 years' time may be completely different. It might be to run a marathon. It might be to do a stage of the Tour de France. It's all sorts of things. But it's all a cycle. But avoid romanticising the past. Avoid over-obsessing about how great you did in the past, what great shape you were in the past, because things change, but things can come round again. Okay. So that's my third point on Brexit. Let's find my fourth point. My fourth point, is the tendency to blame others. So one of the things very much that was successful in the Brexit campaign was the number of advertising hoardings that were covered in posters which either expressed or impliedly blamed everything on immigrants. You know, that is a deeply, deeply unattractive message to put, but it was very effective, because people love to blame other people. People love to blame their lack of success on other people. The fact that we have jobs in this country that people here won't do because the wage rates are too low, or we have jobs that are in parts of the country where people are not prepared to move to work. Now, I'm not trying to sound like Margaret Thatcher here. As I said, my husband's an immigrant, so I understand what it's like at the bottom end. He spent 10 years digging holes for the Brits. That's what he did. That's how he started. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that what happened in Brexit, and it's about human nature, is this idea it's easier to see yourself as a victim than to see yourself as the protagonist, the main action figure in your own life story. And you need to get out of that mindset, particularly if you want to train. If you get an injury, if you have a bad day at the gym, don't blame it on anybody else. Accept it for you. I'm not suggesting you beat yourself out, because that's not positive either. I'm saying that you accept yourself. You accept less imperfection without catastrophizing it and blaming it on somebody else. If you have a bad day at the gym, hey, you have a bad day at the gym. You can do things that day to counterbalance it. You can, for example, eat super healthy that day, even though you've not trained well. You can get a good night's sleep and just do the old Scarlet O'Hara. Tomorrow's another day, and that's really, really important. So don't blame other people. Accept responsibility. Your goals are your goals. Your performance is your performance. Okay. Point 5 is short-term thinking. One of the really interesting things that's come out of Brexit is the number of people who voted out who now are regretting the decision, because they say they didn't realise what it meant. Now, quite apart from the fact that you shouldn't vote on something as crucial as this if you don't understand or you don't fully appreciate what's going to happen. The whole voting was driven by short-term thinking, this idea that we can make Britain great again, or we can take the money that is currently paid into the European Union and use it on our own hospitals and schools. without thinking broadly. I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who voted out. She and I were talking at the weekend, and she wanted to. She was looking to spend some money on something which was not a a desperate purchase. It was a discretionary purchase, but it was a couple of £1,000. And I was saying to her, I really think you need to save that money because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know that there'll be a banking crisis. She's a hypnotherapist, and we don't know whether people are going to have money to spend on hypnotherapy. People will rein in their spending. And she looked at me and she looked sort of amazed. And I realised she hadn't actually thought ahead at all. She hadn't realised that her vote could have long-term financial consequences for the country and for herself. It was really bizarre, but that was the impression I got. And so I think a lot of the voting that was motivated by that. A lot of the not voting was motivated by that. So a lot of young people, although the statistics have been that the majority of young people wanted to stay in, a huge number of them just didn't vote. And if you don't vote, then you have no say in the outcome. And if you have no say in that, it's pointless complaining afterwards. You should have thought of that. Your actions should have long-term consequences and understand what the long-term consequences are. Now, in a fitness context, that is something which can actually be a strength to you. So, no fitness is short-term, no fitness is instant. It takes time and persistence. So you need to take a long-term view. So encourage yourself to take a long-term view. As I go back to the previous point about romanticising the past, if you have a bad day at the gym, don't worry, because it's about the long-term view. The nutritionist on this channel, Maya Lloyd, always says to me about nutrition that it's about 90% getting it right, and don't worry about the other 10%. If you're desperate for that bacon sandwich or that piece of cake, have it, because it's about long-term health and about looking at the overall view, not the small things along the way. So adopt a long-term view when it comes to weights. Accept the fact it's going to take you time to build weights. One of the questions I got asked on this channel recently was, how do I build good arms for summer? Now this is in June. And the answer to that is, well, I can help a bit, but there's not an awful lot I can do between now and July. I can do an awful lot between now and next July 2017. Between now and this July, I can do a bit around the shape of your arms, but you're not going to be able to build much muscle definition in that time. So take a long-term view when it comes to weights. Weights in those classic areas like, any of the skill-based sports like golf, for example, where it takes a long time to get to the point where you actually see real results and you look expert. It takes a long time. Okay, so that's my my fifth point. Now my sixth point is about, in effect, what you can learn from this. What's the smart money telling you that you can learn from Brexit? Now the smart money is telling you, first of all, you need to listen to yourself, listen to your own motivation. Make sure you weave your motivation into your goals. So it's pointless, for example, if you're an introvert deciding you're going to do 3 group classes a week, if you work in open plan anyway, and actually what you need at night is you need solitude. If you are an introvert, then work your fitness goals into understanding your motivation into doing things alone. So you might do a couple of weight sessions and a long run, for example. That would be something which would be much more likely to happen because it sits with your natural inclination. If you're someone who's, significance is your button, so you want to feel you matter, then obviously entering things like competitions as a way to motivate yourself is a great way to keep your motivation going. If you are about connection, then your group exercise is a great one, or having a relationship with a trainer who encourages you is a really great one to motivate yourself. So first thing I said on Smart Money is to make sure you understand your own emotional motivation. The second point is to understand the need for connections. So one of the things that Brexit has done is question the whole idea of community and how strong our communities are and how fast our communities have changed and whether that has affected connection. And now I personally believe that change is a good thing. I like change. Clearly I'm married to an immigrant, so I'm curious about the cultures, and I find that interesting and attractive. And for a lot of people, though, having connection is really important, and not having those connections disturbed is really important. So having things like routine, it can be really, really important in terms of delivering your fitness goals. So in the way that people were striving for things the way they were, which is misguided, but the underlying motivation is, I want things to be steady. In terms of your fitness, strive for steadiness. Strive for, it's the hare and the tortoise slide. Strive for slow and steady, because you reach your goal if you're slow and steady. And you won't reach your goal. You just dash at it and have short-term thinking. And then the last point on this, in terms of what you need to do, is I talked about the advertising campaigns they used in Brexit and how effective they were. Understand the power of imagery and understand the power of imagery for you, for your motivation. There are three different types of people basically. There are people who are visual, so pictures and how things look are really important. There are people who are oral, so it's how things sound, and there are people who are what I call kinesthetic, and it's about how things feel. And those are the three broad types of ways that people experience the world. If you are visual, imagery is really, really important to you. You'll know you're visual because you use visual language. You'll say things like, I can see that, or that looks good to me. The way you look might be quite important. The way other people look might be quite important to you. You use imagery to help you. So if you want to, for example, have a video diary, take before and after photographs, that's really useful if you're visual. Having pictures up of physiques that you admire is another really good motivator. So if you are visual, that using imagery in the way that the Brexit campaign used imagery is really, really important. In terms of the other two types of ways you experience the world, the kinesthetic way, that's really about things like connection, how you feel about things. And again, you'll know you're kinesthetic because you'll say things like, I really feel that, or that feels good to me. Those are sorts of language styles you use. If you are that type of person, then for example, building cardio into your routine is really important because you need the happy hormones because they will make you feel good and make you feel you can achieve anything. I'm quite kinesthetic, and when I lift, I'm very conscious that I'm actually feeling the muscles. I'm quite also picky about what weights I use because it's about the feel of the weight in my hand, and I want it to feel right. So being kinesthetic, for me, feeling in weights is really important. I once trained in a gym in Manchester, and it was really cold and it was snowing. It was early in the morning, and they had no proper heating. And when I picked up the weights, they were cold in the hand, and it was even now I remember, it was a really unpleasant training session because I just didn't like the feel of that at all. So that's because I'm kinesthetic. If you're oral, that means that it's about what you hear, and again you'll use oral type phraseology. So you'll say things like, I hear you, are you listening, that sounds good to me. All those sorts of phrases mean that you're oral, and in those situations then things like having great music when you train is really important. It will be really good in terms of being a smart way to train. So using good music, maybe listening to podcasts around fitness is another really good way to exercise the oral side of your brain. So going back to the summary of what have I covered, I've talked about Brexit, and I've talked about the key learnings from that, and the points that I've raised are, first of all, persistence. Being really persistent is important. I mean, that certainly helped the out campaigners. Understanding your own emotional motivation and building that into your training. So the Brexit campaigners used that, particularly the out campaign used that very effectively. They understood people's feelings of hurt and isolation, and they fed that, whether they fed it rightly or wrongly, they fed it, and that helped them to get people out to vote. In your context, it's going to be understanding your emotional motivation and creating an exercise experience that really satisfies that emotional motivation. Then the third point was the tendency to romanticize the past. So in a fitness context, that means don't spend all your time harking back to a point when you were super fit. Understand that being fit is a cycle, and it's a cycle that goes round and round from fit to super fit, fit to super fit. If you like exercise, then you need to just accept the fact that you're going to have periods when you're more fit than others. That being super fit, you have to sacrifice other things, and sometimes in your life that's just not to be done. You need to focus on other things, so you won't always be at your peak of your fitness. The next one is a tendency to blame others, and that means for yourself in your training regime, accepting responsibility for good days and bad days. Short-term thinking, so that's classic for weight. You can't build muscle in a day. You've got to accept the fact that it's going to take you to build a decent physique. As a young man, you might be able to build a physique within 6 months. If you're a woman or an older man, it might take a year. I've been lifting weights for now almost 10 years. I don't have to lift so much now because I'm not looking to get massive. I've built a lot of muscle, and I'm happy with that. But I do have to be persistent in it, and it's taken me a long time to get to this stage. And then the last point was just to bring it all together in terms of what would I do if I was you and you were smart. What would you do? I think you'd listen to what feels right to you. Follow your emotional motivation in terms of how you want to train. Make sure that you connect with your emotional motivation in terms of how you train, and use forms of motivation which are in keeping with your way of experiencing the world. So imagery if you're visual, sounds if you're oral, and feelings if you are kinesthetic. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope that's been helpful. I hope it's got you thinking. Please do subscribe. It would be great to have you. This channel is all about fitness, nutrition, motivation. There's obviously a big mental element on this channel as well, so I hope to keep you thinking about things. Do share, do like or not like, depending on what you think. Hopefully you do like. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.